All right, Tim Morbitzer, would you tell us who you are
My name's Tim Morbitzer.
and the date?
It is September
Third, I
23rd,
think, 2015.
2015.
And Tim is here as part of our oral history campaign. Tim, first, when I think of you in German Village, I think about the big Morbitzer family you have.
Okay.
Would you tell me about the Morbitzer's roots in German Village and a little bit about your family, your siblings?
Yeah, absolutely. I have 10 brothers and sisters. I'm ninth of 11. And my dad's company has always been kind of in this area, but because of the size of the family, we lived out further in what used to be kind of countryside, out near Grove City in a larger home to accommodate the family. When most of my brothers and sisters had moved away from home, my parents decided to move closer to my dad's work, and they'd always loved German Village, and so they were able to get a house at what was an absolute deal at the time because houses were still pretty reasonably priced. So they were able to get a house in German Village, and that's where we moved. It was me, two of my brothers, and I think at least temporarily one of my sisters at the time. So
What address was that, Tim?
736 South 5th, right at Frankfurt.
And I'm speaking a little bit louder because I'm not mic'd, that's all.
Okay.
And your parents are both gone now.
Yes.
Did you go to high school some while you lived there?
No, I moved here when I was 12, so I was still in grade school. Went to St. Mary's for a little bit, but then I went to high school at Bishop Reedy, where all of my brothers and sisters had gone. We already had established a lot of friends and a lot of family there from growing up and having been in that school's district. And so we got permission from the diocese for me to go to Bishop Reedy instead of what would have been Worley at the time. So I went to Reedy for high school.
Big Catholic family.
Absolutely.
But I remember now, I keep thinking, or I used to think that the Morbitzers had this multi-generational history here, but because your parents lived here, but that's not really the case. You are relative newcomers.
Not no, well, to some degree. My dad's family, they actually grew up over at on 18th, kind of in what, and then at Sycamore Ninth, there were relatives there. It was all area that was parts of it where the family lived. They were all in that area, and then parts of it were taken for the freeway, and it kind of split up the family when the freeway went through, and a lot of the housing was removed. And so my dad is from a family of 12. And so they did all grow up there, but then everybody moved out, and like I said, their old homestead disappeared. And so then this was kind of a return. When my parents moved back here, it was kind of a return to the neighborhood. And then not only did I stay in the neighborhood, but a number of my brothers and sisters stayed in German Village or the immediate area. So.
And you said you were about 12. What year was that when you moved here?
78.
78. So 18 years into the whole restoration movement down here, 30 some odd years ago. So you've seen a lot of things happen in German Village. Can you tell me what it looked like in 78, how it differed, how it looked the same?
It still had the same flavor. I mean, it has the nice, quaint brick, the housing stock and everything, but it was definitely a lot more transitional. I know the house at the end of the street on Sycamore, in fact we still call it the chicken house because they had chickens, and we didn't even think that much of it at the time. But there were a lot of houses that were original, that hadn't had been restored, hadn't had much work done to them, and a lot of them were in pretty bad disrepair. So I mean, it was still very transitional.
And the businesses, was it pretty much I know a lot of business names have changed, but was it pretty much still the same layout with shops and restaurants, coffee shops sprinkled throughout the neighborhood like it is now?
They were. You know what though? Thinking back, it felt like there were more. I mean, they were sprinkled throughout the neighborhood, but it felt like there were more. Especially retail, I guess. I mean, classifying them as businesses, I guess, making a distinction between like professional versus retail.
Right.
It felt like there was a lot more retail. You had places like the Old World Bazaar, that was still there. I mean, that was still going. And then you had the Village Owl, which was over on City Park. You had the Emporium, which is where David Schoolers is now. Then Jeff Ruff had his clothing store right there at Mohawk and Beck, which is still retail, but it definitely had, it's gone through a lot of phases, and it had definite more retail flavor to it.
A lot more people coming and going off the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
forth. So, at 12 years old, did you take a bus to school? Or?
I did, took the city bus, yep.
A city bus,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then you got home about 3:30 in the afternoon?
4:30.
That late?
Mm-hmm.
Because primarily the bus ride? Or?
Yep, take the city bus, because it was standard city bus that transferred in front of Lazarus, and then, so I had to wait for that, and then take the bus back down to German Village.
Was that kind of scary for a 12-year-old?
No, not at all, really. I mean, thinking back, I mean, we went through a little bit rougher neighborhoods on the bus, but I was never concerned. Caught it right outside of school. The bus stop was right outside of Bishop Reedy, and I took it right down to Lazarus.
Did you have Playmates here in the village?
Yeah, there were. That's interesting. There were more people, there were more kids my age then than there are kids that age now. I mean, you don't see it as much. I mean, we would play out, and then it was kids largely from St. Mary's that still lived in the neighborhood. But you don't see that much now. I mean, you really don't. And it wasn't like it was a neighborhood overrun with children. I mean, it wasn't like you see in the suburbs now. But there was, clearly you would be driving through the neighborhood and you'd see a lot more kids and cats.
Yeah. And probably in the park too, Schill Park.
Oh yeah, yep.
Is that the kind of thing you do? Would you go play baseball or basketball or tennis or anything in the park?
Yeah, we did. We played in the park a lot. We did. We were at Schiller a lot. And then also, given that it was the transition time when I was going into high school, I had a lot of high school activities too. But my two younger brothers, they especially spent more time playing down here and with neighborhood kids.
Now, have you ever lived outside the village then, since your family moved here when you were 12? Have you gone back outside the village?
I rented for a year in the Brewery District, so if you can count 2 blocks outside the village as being, much of an adventure, that was it for just under a year. I was in an apartment over there.
Was that a conscious decision, or was it while you were having a house redone?
No, I moved out of my parents' house, and that was my first place. I moved over there into the apartments that they were redoing. That was my first place out, and then I was paying rent, and rent was high. And a real estate agent friend of mine, I was having dinner with him, and he said he had asked what I was paying, and he's like, "Wow," he goes, "You could own a house for that." And I thought he was absolutely crazy, and so he said, let me show you some places. And so he showed us a house on City Park, and it was partially redone. It was in the midst of being remodeled, and so we thought, we can buy that place and put a couple $1,000s in 6 months into it and sell it and make a profit. And it took a lot more money than that, and it took 9 years, but finished, actually got the house remodeled, and we're able to sell it at a decent amount of profit.
But you lived there for 8 or 9 years?
Yep, lived there 9 years.
What was the address?
790 City Park.
790, so you were on the east side, and you were just a block or so up from where I am at 835. A little cottage, was it a double or just a single?
Had been a double, had been converted by the previous owner to a single. It had just been converted. In fact, when we moved in, it still had 2 addresses. So we had to contact the city and choose an address. So
let's transition. Well, tell me one thing about your father's business. When it is now over in the Brewery District on Front Street, right? You said it has moved since then. Where was it before it was on Front Street?
Actually, it was when we moved here. It's always been in the Brewery District, technically, by by the boundaries. I mean, there was no Brewery District at that time, but it was at 500 South High when we moved down here. And then a number of years later, they tore the building down and discontinued his lease. And so he bought 2 houses on Front Street at Whittier, and joined those 2 houses together and used those for the office and kind of a warehouse. And then in '86, sold those 2 houses and bought the building that we're currently in on Front Street at 707 South Front. And we've been there ever since. So, which still feels like the new building to us. But
how many of the siblings went into the business then to follow your father into that?
Everyone, all of my brothers and sisters have at one time or another worked at the company except for 2. Well, except for 3. The third one, her husband still works there, so I kind of count that. I kind of count her as being included.
And are you the only Morbitzer there now?
No. It's me and 3 of my brothers, and a sister, and a nephew, a niece's husband, and then the remaining employees are not relatives. So yeah, it was still family oriented for sure.
Very much family organization. And what made you want to stay in that business then? I assume you, like your brothers and sisters, you said did some work there. At some point you must have decided, well, this is pretty cool. I'll just follow in my father's and brothers and sisters' footsteps rather than go off on my own and do something else.
No, I never made that conscious decision. And my undergrad is in journalism, which was the Ohio State School of Journalism. That was where they housed their focus on advertising at the time. That's where that degree was. So in order to get a focus on advertising, you had to get a journalism degree. And so that's what I got, so that the master plan was to go into journalism or to advertising. So in '84, when I graduated, I needed spending money, and so my dad needed somebody to do filing in the office. There were only a couple office employees at the time, is all they needed. And so I said, sure, I will pick up a couple extra bucks, I'll work in the office, doing some odd jobs. And so started working there, got involved just kind of in the day-to-day operations just through being close to and associated with it all. Got to learn the ins and outs of the company. I was fairly fascinated with how the company worked and all of the inner workings of it. Got to know it really well. And then when I graduated in '88, I had prepared all of my resumes, had everything all ready, had the slick presentation all ready to go for job interviews, sent out my resumes, and I don't know if my dad didn't expect me to get any responses or not, but when I got my first response on a resume that requesting an interview, he sat me down and said, how about if I, make you an offer? He said, if you want to stay here, here's the deal. You have to spend 6 months on a truck learning the company, the service side of it, and send it out. You have to know, he said, you know the office well, but learning the whole service side, you have to know what the service guys experience. And so spent 6 months on the truck and then transitioned into a far more managerial role. And then 30 some odd years later, here I am.
What is your role with the company now?
President.
President of the company.
Yeah.
Happy with it?
Oh yeah, ecstatic. I mean, it's always interesting. It's it's close. It's convenient. Knock on wood, we're doing well. It's gone through some transitions, but yeah, it's an exciting place to work.
Okay, a hard shift now. Since I've known you, you've been out as a gay person. How old are you?
I am 49.
49. You've been out as a gay person, like I said, and in German Village, and you've had partners here. Tell me what that was like growing up down here as a 12-year-old and on up and discovering you were gay, and what did that mean for you and your family, you and your friends? Can you give me a little sense of what it was like growing up in that situation?
Sure. I think my experience was probably pretty textbook. I lived down here, and so I had exposure, and it was one of those situations where, and without going too personal on the explanation, I had always internalized it, felt that I could always keep it under wraps, and at the same time, living down here, there was always exposure to some degree. I mean, you would see what were clearly gay couples out at the park, and walking down the street, at the restaurants, in the shops. And so it was interesting that I had that early exposure, but then still it absolutely was not, at least for me, it wasn't an environment that I felt that I would ever be comfortable being out in. Society was still pretty rough on gay individuals, and so it wasn't anything that I thought I was going to be able to live in. As time went on, my thinking changed, of course. Society's thinking has changed a great deal, fortunately. And so it was easier for me. And for me especially, again, without getting too personal, it was more of a natural progression. It wasn't anything where I had any sort of an aha moment where I said, I'm gonna come, screaming out, and I'm gonna let everybody know. It was more of, I think probably a lot more people knew. I think that, especially living down here, that transition was easier for me because it wasn't as if we were in an environment where people, and by people I mean friends and family, had not been exposed to any other gay people. So I think that having my family and friends, having gay family and friends, I think that made it easier for me. So, I mean, I think a lot of people other than me did all the hard work before me. So
your family was accepting of gays before they knew you were gay?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and they very much, we grew up in a pretty strict Catholic family, but they pretty much followed, I would say that my family very closely followed society's views. I think very closely. It wasn't a situation where I would say any of them were opinion leaders, certainly. But I think that, and to their credit especially, they very much stayed with or ahead of what you would call like mainstream society. I mean, especially given the strict Catholic upbringing that we had.
I was just thinking about that, especially being Catholic. That must have been pretty nice, pretty lucky for you to have parents who were forward-thinking like that, outside of their religious bounds.
Beyond lucky, yeah, beyond lucky. Yeah, and it was, I mean, so obviously we went through the same, we went to Catholic grade school, high school, so, I mean, it wasn't as if there was very little even discussion within school. So everything was very much, all of the progress that was made for me personally was done outside of any classroom, for sure.
Did you get hassled or bullied any in school?
Oh yeah.
Because of it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was never the most macho guy in grade school and high school. So yeah, I mean, it was no fun. Yeah, but fortunately, progress.
Yeah. And it's interesting that I consider you a community leader. You've certainly been very active in the society, and you're active in business, and your family is well known. It's interesting that you weren't one who moved in when the gays were moving in and buying and fixing up houses. This was your home all along.
Yeah, it was, and we saw it. I mean, this was happening all around us, and it was. I think it's a situation where I think I was busy growing up, and didn't necessarily realize entirely what was happening all around. I knew who the people were who were buying the houses and fixing them up, which is kind of funny because now as an adult, those people who I just was in awe about, that number one, that they could buy and redo these houses and have these great lives, with these really cool houses. Then number two, that they could be so comfortable with themselves and being out. I mean, and so I was always in awe of these folks, and now these are my peers. I mean, and I see them socially. I mean, Steve Schellebarger, I was just hanging out with, 2 weeks ago. We went to an event. I see these guys, Michael Council. I mean, I see these folks socially, and it's interesting to interact with them now and to see how far we've all come.
And these are people who were a little bit older than you,
Mm-hmm.
who you saw as a kid as being gay
Mm-hmm.
and living a lifestyle here as an adult.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, and I guess it wasn't. I mean, it was pretty much just understood. I mean, they were single men of a certain age. It was just understood that they, weren't the marrying type, and so.
Confirmed bachelor, I think.
Right. Yeah. They were confirmed bachelors for sure. And so it was, that was who was doing the houses. I mean, and that really was who was doing, from what we saw, at least when I was young, that was absolutely who was doing the houses.
You mentioned Steve Schellebarger.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, if you would, about 2 or 3 influential people down here who were gay, who became pretty well spoken in the community,
Mm-hmm.
community leaders, the people you looked up to. Who were they?
I mean, obviously Fred and Howard. I mean, obviously. I mean, they were. I mean, from even young. I mean, they were very much. They were always vocal, and they were. It was interesting because they were accepted. No one whispered about them. No one, chuckled about them. They, for whatever reason, they were completely accepted and completely. I don't know if you would use the term normalized into the neighborhood, but I mean, they had a business. They had a successful business. They had. I mean, if any of the whispering was done about them, it was about how amazing their apartment was that, the Lucky got to see. And they owned properties. They were on the radio. They had that newspaper article for a bit. And so I was always in awe. I mean, because I would go in house trial haven for, whatever. And I was always just in awe that they had established their lives, and they lived what appeared to be, again, quote unquote, normal lives. They walked through their lives and through society as if this weren't something different for them, as if it were as accepted as a hetero relationship. I mean, and all along, I mean, that was awe-inspiring. So, and I was fortunate, because when you think about it, not a lot of people, even in like the other neighborhoods and things, not a lot of people have had those sorts of role models. So I mean, that was huge, and for both of them. I mean, and they were both great to me. And I think they knew from early on, that I was gay, and they were always, fantastic with me. They would always. Both of them would sit, and chat about anything. They were wonderful about it. Missed them both. And then.
You mentioned Steve Schellebarger.
Yeah.
He was here redoing houses, rehabbing houses at
Right.
that time, right?
Right. Yeah, and Steve's been. He was on my radar, and I knew him when he lived here. He lived here with his partner. His partner died in, I don't remember the year, but it was about 92, I believe. And then Steve moved out of the neighborhood shortly after. But yeah, Steve's always been a good guy. He's always been, and I knew everything he did here. Again, the fact that somebody could, somebody coming from, from my lifestyle could actually, buy houses with everybody else, redo houses with everybody else, live in those houses, live in the neighborhood, have all the friends, have all the community. Because Steve was a well-liked guy, still is a well-liked guy, and now he's a very vocal, very respected leader in the gay community. Arguably, probably most respected.
Did you know Bob Curry?
No, I didn't.
That might have been before your time. Who moved here from Texas and rehabbed several houses over at roughly back in Fifth, I think, and who then died of AIDS. Did you see people dying?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was and it was like Steve's partner. It was, yeah, there were a lot.
Was that personally frightening for you?
It was terrifying. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
It was, yep.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
enough, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know. But after that long nightmare, then finally some hope in the early 90s, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was. Well, and plus, a lot of it was information. When the AIDS crisis first hit, I mean, it was terrifying in its being so mysterious. And you had all sorts of rumors, people talking, people whispering, so-and-so, heard so-and-so had AIDS, heard you could get it through everything. I mean, people were terrified. I mean, because nobody knew anything about it. No one knew what to do, didn't know how to even medicate for it. Nothing was available at the time. It was this nasty, just devastating, horrible disease, awful to watch. The political climate wasn't good for it at the time, and it was awful. And personally, it was awful because everybody was talking and whispering about who might have it and how you might get it. Everybody, the gay friends that I had, we were all checking ourselves. People had heard, here's how you can tell, and we were like constantly checking. Even people who weren't like doing anything risky, you didn't know. I mean, the rumors, no one knew, and so everybody was just paranoid. I mean, paranoia is probably the best way to describe it.
Amid that paranoia, was there any ostracization? Were you ostracized? Were your friends? Steve, I think, told me, Schellebarger, in his interview, that he actually knew a time or two when people would cross the street just so they wouldn't be breathing the same air or something.
See, and Steve is one of those standard bearers that I had mentioned earlier that I have. Basically, there are people that I have to thank for all of the hard work that they did, and dedication and sacrifice that they did. I mean, I don't know if I could be as brave as he was in everything. Well, in him and his peers in the community at the time. He was older. I mean, at the time that it hit, I was young. I was just coming to grips with who I was. I wasn't out that much, and so I didn't have. Fortunately, I didn't have the stigma of what society thought of me because I wasn't necessarily out to everybody at the time. So I was still in my closed little group and closed little community, and so we just basically were huddled, terrified of what was going on. I mean, we heard, about New York, and we heard about San Francisco, and there were activists here, and Steve and his peers were those activists. I mean, and they were working hard, and they were going to Washington, and they were lobbying and arguing, and they were vocal. They weren't hiding, and that's what made the difference.
And a lot of this was during the Reagan years when there was very little said about it on the federal level, national level.
Yep.
Yeah. One question that I've been asking people is, why do you think gay men have been prevalent and open in German Village, but maybe not so much the gay women? Or if they're here, they're not the the tight-knit group that I see a lot of the gay men as being.
That's funny. I was wondering the same thing on the way over here. I thought it was interesting that a lot of the gays that have settled in German Village have been men, and women. It seems like there's a larger lesbian community in other areas. Clintonville, of course, has a larger community, and Short North, of course. But I don't know. I mean, why men? I mean, I don't know if it's a societal thing where women didn't redo houses, because I mean, certainly they are now. Maybe back in in the early '70s, maybe women weren't as upfront about the redoing places, because I mean, a lot of the gay men that moved here initially moved here and redid houses. I mean, that's to a large degree what was going on, and then sold them to their friends. I mean, and so then of course you get that influx.
One of the answers I was given, and I think this is the best one I've heard, and you can tell me what you think about it, is that it was more of a gender issue than a sexual orientation issue. That women in general just were not able to get bank loans like men were.
Huh. I mean that's definitely the case. Very well could have been. And like I said, even the gender issue where it wasn't accepted for women to remodel, and do these restorations on houses. I mean now you see it more. I mean now you absolutely do. I mean you see not only of course not just lesbian. You see women stepping up and doing a lot of the renovations, and even in couples. In straight couples that we know, you see that largely women are taking the lead in doing the renovations. I mean, look at Andrea Camber. I mean, probably the best example. But yeah, I mean that's an example. But back then it wasn't. I mean, women more did. Everything was just so traditional, even in the '70s. I mean, it's still, to look back, to me, of course, it doesn't seem like that long ago. But when you actually stop and think about it, I mean, things were a lot more traditional, a lot more, I'd call backward then, for gender roles.
German Village was definitely the early gay neighborhood in Columbus, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was nothing else. Are there other examples that you know of or can think of?
No.
Short North didn't exist.
Right.
Victorian Village was scary still.
Old Town East still.
No, Old Town East wasn't even thought of.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about when I would have been, at an age where I would have been actually looking at community and neighborhood, would have been, early 80s, mid 80s. But no, it's just German Village. I mean, and then of course the Short North started to turn around, and I mean, and now you've got, you have pockets and we're everywhere.
Now that it's more acceptable, I suppose, men can more easily say, I like this particular neighborhood, I like what's going on in this other neighborhood, et cetera, rather than being directed toward the one place where it would be accepted.
Right. Oh, definitely. I mean, and I ran into an acquaintance a couple days ago and said, I haven't seen you forever. And he's like, yeah, I live in Dublin. It's like, no one would have ever, I mean, a gay couple would have never moved to Dublin in, 80 whatever. I mean, they very well could have, but you would have never heard of it. I mean, I would have never heard of it.
So in that regard, it's a societal change.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
What do you see for the future of German Village? What would you like to see it be 20, 25 years from now?
In terms of what?
The way it looks, the people who live here, the mix of people, what we're doing with our buildings down here and our streets.
I think the mix of people is probably the most important. What lends itself to that is making sure that the properties that we have are accessible to a wide mix of people. We have a lot of critics of German Village say, people moved in and gentrified it, which by definition has happened. But to our credit, we've also maintained a nice mix of rentals. And you'll hear everybody, talk about, you can rent a 1-bedroom studio, reasonably next to $1 million house. That's really important. That's extremely important to have that mix, that variety within a neighborhood as a community. You have to have that. You have to have that diversity of people, of opinions. So for a community, that's extremely important. And like I said, in order to do that, the housing has to be accessible. Yeah, we can have great homes and everything. We definitely can have that. But I think German Village has shown that those can exist side by side next to starter apartments. It's absolutely doable. The people, even though it was a brewery district, still, you can move out into your first place, and that first place can be German Village. That's important. Infrastructure-wise, it would be nice to see, just kind of talking about, pipe dream kind of stuff. The curbs and sidewalks and streets, that sort of thing that is going to have to be maintained. That's a given. But then, if there were like dream projects, it would be nice to see, underground wires, maybe someday. Maybe someday we won't even be using wires. And so, to get rid of kind of that stuff, to make sure that we keep a good streetscape, to make sure that we don't allow things to happen and how that affect the streetscape negatively, things like that. It's extremely important to keep that whole fabric of the neighborhood and everything, keep it a walkable neighborhood. You and I were talking earlier about how important it is. I walk everywhere. I own a car, but I drive it maybe once a month.
You walk to work?
I walk to work because I work so close. I walk to work, walk to the grocery, walk to restaurants, walk everywhere, walk to friends' houses. We're lucky to have, the range of commercial that we do down here. So keeping it a walkable neighborhood, making sure that we have safe places to cross, that kind of thing is important. Moving out into what I would really like to see for the community is to see it touch neighboring communities a little more effectively in terms of having a good influence on how the connection to downtown is developed as we move forward, having positive relations with all of the developing communities all around us, making sure, taking a stewardship position in how those neighborhoods develop, making sure that our development and our neighbors, like on High Street and Front Street, is done in a thoughtful way, even in terms of how we, as pedestrians, access High Street or the freeway to downtown. Those things are extremely important.
And I hope you'll be around in 20, 25 years to see it.
Yeah, me too. And I'll probably still be in German Village. I have no reason to think that I won't.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, John.